Imagine your body 1 hour from now, not tomorrow, not next year. 1 hour, you are sitting exactly where you are right now, maybe on a couch, maybe at a desk, maybe in a car seat waiting for a light to change. Nothing feels different, no pain, no warning sign. Just stillness, but inside you something is already changing. Your blood is slowing down, not stopping, not dramatically, quietly, like a river losing its current. And by the time 60 minutes pass, your blood will not be the same blood it was when you sat down. This is not a scare tactic. This is biology. Cold, measurable, fascinating biology. For most of human history, sitting was rare. Our ancestors crouched, they walked, they climbed, they carried. Stillness was the exception, not the rule. Today, stillness is the rule. The average person spends more hours sitting than sleeping. And your circulatory system, the very engine that keeps every cell in your body alive, was never designed for this kind of silence. So what actually happens inside your blood vessels during 1 hour of sitting? The answer starts somewhere you would never expect. Not your heart, not your brain, your legs. Deep inside your thighs and calves, there are muscles that do something extraordinary every time you move. Scientists call it the skeletal muscle pump. Think of it as a second heart hidden in your legs. Every step you take, every calf raise, every shift of your weight squeezes the veins running through your muscles. That squeeze pushes blood upward, back toward your heart, fighting gravity the entire way. When you sit down, that second heart goes silent, and gravity does not forgive silence. Blood begins to pool, slowly, quietly, in the lowest points of your body. Within the first few minutes of sitting, blood flow to your legs starts to drop. By the 30-minute mark, studies using ultrasound imaging have shown measurable reductions in blood flow through the arteries behind your knees. By 1 hour, that reduction becomes significant enough to change how your blood vessels themselves are behaving. Here is where it gets strange. Your blood vessels are not passive tubes. They are living, reactive structures lined with a paper-thin layer of cells called the endothelium. The endothelium is like a security system for your entire circulatory network. It senses movement. It senses pressure. It senses flow. When blood moves briskly through a vessel, it drags across the endothelial lining. Scientists call this shear stress. Shear stress sounds like a bad thing. It is actually the opposite. That gentle dragging motion signals your blood vessels to release a molecule called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is one of the most important discoveries in modern medicine. It was so significant that the scientists who identified its role in blood vessels won a Nobel Prize. Nitric oxide tells your blood vessels to relax, to widen, to stay flexible and healthy. But nitric oxide is not automatic. It depends on movement. No movement, no shear stress. No shear stress, less nitric oxide. Within 1 hour of sitting, researchers have recorded measurable drops in an artery's ability to dilate properly. Your blood vessels, quite literally, start losing their flexibility after 60 minutes of stillness. Imagine a garden hose that is used to bending and flexing suddenly forced to stay rigid. That is what is happening inside your legs right now, if you have been sitting for a while. But your blood vessels are not the only thing changing. Your blood itself is transforming at a molecular level. To understand this, we need to travel back in time, not centuries, just a few decades. In the 1970s, doctors began noticing something odd among long-haul airline passengers. People who had sat for extended hours on flights were showing up in emergency rooms with dangerous blood clots in their legs. Doctors gave it a nickname, economy class syndrome. The clots formed in deep veins, often in the calf, where blood had been pooling silently for hours. If a clot breaks free and travels to the lungs, the result can be life-threatening. This is an extreme case. Most people sitting for 1 hour are in no such danger, but the underlying mechanism is the same mechanism, just at a much smaller scale. Stillness slows blood. Slowed blood behaves differently. When blood moves quickly, its components stay evenly distributed, like sugar stirred into water. When blood slows down, heavier components begin to settle and interact more than they should. Platelets, the tiny cell fragments responsible for clotting, become slightly more likely to stick together. Clotting factors, proteins that circulate quietly in your blood, become slightly more active. None of this happens instantly. None of this happens dramatically. But research measuring blood samples before and after prolonged sitting has found detectable increases in clotting activity within a single hour. Your blood, in a very real sense, becomes thicker in behavior if not in appearance. This is your body's ancient survival instinct misfiring. For millions of years, stillness usually meant one of two things: rest after intense physical exertion, or injury. Your blood evolved to prepare for injury during stillness by leaning slightly toward clotting readiness. But modern stillness is different. You are not resting after a hunt. You are answering emails. Your ancient blood chemistry does not know the difference. Now let's go somewhere even more surprising. Somewhere most people never think about. Your fat cells. Specifically, an enzyme with a strange name, lipoprotein lipase. Lipoprotein lipase acts like a gatekeeper. It sits on the surface of blood vessels near your muscles and fat tissue, and its job is to pull fat out of your bloodstream. When you are active, even mildly active, lipoprotein lipase works constantly. It clears fat from your blood, using it for fuel, keeping your bloodstream clean and efficient. When you sit, this enzyme does something almost unbelievable. It shuts down, not gradually over days, within hours. Researchers studying inactivity have found that prolonged sitting can suppress lipoprotein lipase activity dramatically, sometimes by the majority of its normal function. Imagine a cleanup crew that works non-stop, clearing debris from a busy highway. Now imagine that crew simply walking off the job the moment traffic stops moving. That is what happens inside your blood vessels during sitting. Fat that would normally be cleared begins to linger longer in your bloodstream. This is not something you can feel. There is no sensation, no warning. But blood tests taken after prolonged sitting periods have shown measurable increases in circulating fats and reduced efficiency in fat metabolism. 1 hour may seem too short for this to matter. But scientists studying metabolic responses have found that the shift begins almost immediately once movement stops, particularly in people who already spend most of their day seated. Here is the twist that changes everything. This effect is not primarily about calories burned. Standing up and sitting back down does not meaningfully change your calorie count. The effect is about a switch inside your muscles. A switch that only responds to movement, not effort. Even standing without walking begins to reactivate this switch, which means the solution is not exhausting exercise. It is interruption. Let's return to your bloodstream because there is one more transformation happening that few people ever hear about. Your blood sugar. When you sit for extended periods, your muscles, the largest glucose-absorbing tissue in your body, essentially go idle. Muscles are incredibly efficient at pulling glucose out of your blood, especially when they are contracting. When you sit still, that contraction stops, and so does much of that glucose absorption. Insulin, the hormone responsible for managing blood sugar, has to work harder to keep glucose levels balanced. In laboratory studies, researchers have measured blood glucose and insulin responses before and after periods of sitting compared to periods broken up by light movement. The results were striking. Even brief interruptions, simply standing or taking a short walk every half hour, produced noticeably better blood sugar control than sitting continuously. This means that within a single hour, your body's ability to manage sugar is already shifting, quietly, invisibly, one heartbeat at a time. Now picture your brain. Because your brain is not exempt from any of this. Your brain requires an enormous, constant supply of oxygen-rich blood. It represents a small percentage of your body weight but consumes a disproportionate share of your blood flow. When circulation slows in your lower body, the effects ripple upward. Research using imaging techniques has shown that prolonged sitting can reduce blood flow to the brain, specifically to arteries supplying regions responsible for focus and alertness. This might explain something almost everyone has felt but never understood: that heavy, foggy feeling after sitting through a long meeting. That strange mental fatigue that has nothing to do with how hard you were thinking. Some researchers believe it is connected to this quiet drop in cerebral blood flow. And here is the part that feels almost poetic. The fix is remarkably simple. Studies have shown that just a few minutes of walking can restore blood flow to the brain to levels seen before prolonged sitting began. Your brain is not asking for hours at the gym. It is asking for movement. Any movement. Often. Let's slow down for a moment and talk about your heart, the organ most people assume is doing all the work. Your heart is powerful, but it was never meant to work alone. It depends on your leg muscles, your posture, your breathing, your movement, to help return blood upward through your veins. When you sit, your heart has to rely almost entirely on its own pumping force to keep circulation moving efficiently. Over 1 hour, this is not dangerous for a healthy heart, but researchers have observed measurable increases in heart rate variability changes and blood pressure fluctuations tied to prolonged, uninterrupted sitting. Your heart is not struggling, but it is working differently, working without its usual partner. Now imagine something almost cinematic. If you could shrink down and travel inside a vein in your calf, right now, after an hour of sitting, what would you see? Slower currents, blood moving with less force, less rhythm, platelets drifting closer together than they would during movement. Valves inside your veins, tiny one-way doors that prevent backward flow, sitting under more pressure than usual as blood pools instead of continuing its usual journey. Fat molecules lingering a little longer than they should. Nothing catastrophic, nothing visible, nothing you would notice without a microscope. But an entire hidden world, subtly shifting. This is why doctors and researchers have started using a phrase that sounds dramatic but is scientifically accurate. Sitting disease. Not a disease you catch. A pattern your body slowly adapts to in ways that were never part of its original design. And here is what makes this story genuinely fascinating, rather than frightening. The reversal is astonishingly fast. Unlike many health processes that take weeks or months to shift, the changes triggered by sitting can begin reversing within minutes of standing or walking. Blood flow to the legs increases almost immediately. Nitric oxide production begins climbing again. Lipoprotein lipase reactivates. Blood sugar regulation improves. Cerebral blood flow rises. Your body is not fragile in this story. It is remarkably responsive. It does not require a marathon. It does not require a gym membership. It does not require hours of intense discipline. It requires interruption. Researchers studying workplace health have tested something deceptively simple: breaking up sitting time with brief movement, sometimes as short as a minute or two, every 20 to 30 minutes. The results consistently showed improvements in blood flow, blood sugar regulation, and vascular function, compared to sitting for the same total duration without breaks. This reframes the entire conversation. The danger was never sitting itself. The danger was uninterrupted stillness. Your body does not need constant motion. It needs rhythm. Movement then rest. Movement then rest. Like breathing, like a heartbeat, like the tide. Modern life broke that rhythm. Chairs, desks, screens, commutes, all beautifully engineered for comfort, all quietly disruptive to a circulatory system built for motion. Think about how strange this actually is. We built entire civilizations around comfort, around minimizing physical effort. And in doing so, we accidentally removed the very stimulus our blood vessels depend on to stay healthy. Every ancient survival advantage, walking to find food, standing to stay alert, crouching and rising throughout the day, has quietly disappeared from modern routines. Your blood vessels are still waiting for signals that rarely come anymore. And yet, the solution was never about returning to some impossible ancestral lifestyle. It is about small, repeated interruptions, standing during a phone call, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, even just once, walking while thinking through a problem instead of sitting through it. Every one of these tiny choices sends a signal through your bloodstream. A signal that says, we are still moving. We are still alive in the way our body expects. Let's slow down again, because there is more happening in this hour than most people ever suspect. Look down at your ankles for a moment. If you have been sitting for a while, they may feel slightly tighter than usual. Maybe your shoes feel a touch more snug. This is not your imagination. When blood pools in the lower legs, pressure builds inside the smallest blood vessels, the capillaries. That pressure pushes fluid outward into the surrounding tissue. Doctors call this dependent edema, a fancy term for a simple idea: fluid settling where gravity and stillness meet. Within 1 hour, this shift is usually too subtle to notice. But researchers measuring leg volume before and after prolonged sitting have documented measurable increases, sometimes visible on ultrasound, well before any visible swelling appears. Your body is quietly renegotiating where its fluid lives, 1 minute at a time. Now think about your veins themselves. Not just as pipes, but as structures with history. Veins in your legs contain small one-way valves, flaps of tissue that snap shut after blood passes through them, preventing it from sliding backward under gravity's pull. Every time your leg muscles contract, those valves open and close in perfect rhythm, like tiny gates timed to a parade. When you sit still for an extended period, those valves stop opening and closing as often. Blood rests against them longer than it should. Over years, not hours, this repeated pressure is part of what contributes to varicose veins, those visible, twisting blood vessels that some people develop later in life. 1 hour will not give you varicose veins. But 1 hour is where the pattern begins, repeated thousands of times, across thousands of days, across a lifetime of chairs. This is the strange truth about the human body. It rarely breaks from single moments. It bends slowly from repetition. Which brings us to a question worth pausing on. Why did humans build a world so perfectly designed for sitting? The answer goes back further than office chairs, further than cars, further than school desks. It goes back to the invention of surplus. For most of human history, energy was scarce. Every calorie mattered. Movement was not optional, it was survival. Walking to find food, standing to stay aware of predators, crouching to gather, to hunt, to build. Then agriculture arrived. Then permanent settlements. Then chairs, originally reserved for kings and priests, symbols of status rather than comfort. For thousands of years, chairs were rare. Most people sat on the ground, in positions that kept muscles gently engaged, hips mobile, blood moving. The modern chair, the kind with a backrest and armrests, only became common for ordinary people within the last few centuries. And the truly prolonged, all-day sitting most people experience now, at desks, in front of screens, is barely a century old. Your circulatory system had millions of years to adapt to movement. It has had almost no time at all to adapt to this. That mismatch is not a flaw in you. It is a mismatch in timing. Biology moving at the pace of evolution, culture moving at the pace of invention. Now here is a pattern interrupt worth sitting with, ironically. In the early 2000s, a researcher named James Levine became fascinated by a strange question. Why do some people stay lean almost effortlessly, while others, eating similar amounts, slowly gain weight? His research pointed toward something unexpected. Not exercise, not diet alone, fidgeting. Levine found that people who moved more throughout the day, shifting in their seats, standing periodically, pacing while thinking, burned meaningfully more energy than those who sat rigidly still, even when formal exercise habits were similar. He gave this constant, low-level movement a name: non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. The implication was profound. Health was not only built in gyms, it was built in the countless small movements woven through an ordinary day. This connects directly back to what is happening in your blood right now: every shift of your weight, every stretch, every walk to refill a glass of water. Each one sends a small pulse through your circulatory system, waking up that second heart in your legs, if only for a moment. Now imagine two versions of the same hour. In the first version, you sit motionless, focused, still, productive in the traditional sense. In the second version, you sit for 10 minutes, stand for 1, sit for 10 more, stand again. On paper, both hours look almost identical. Same chair, same task, same location. But inside your bloodstream, they are dramatically different hours. In the second version, nitric oxide production stays more active. Lipoprotein lipase never fully shuts down. Blood sugar regulation stays steadier. Blood pools less in your legs. The task got done in both cases, but your circulatory system experienced two entirely different stories. This is why researchers studying office workers have increasingly focused not on how much people sit, but on how they sit, whether it is continuous or broken into pieces. A landmark line of research, led by scientists studying Australian adults, found that people who broke up their sitting time frequently had better markers of metabolic health, smaller waist circumferences, and improved blood sugar control, compared to people with the same total sitting time taken in longer, uninterrupted stretches. The total hours were similar. The pattern was not. This single insight quietly rewrote how scientists think about modern inactivity. It is not simply a war against sitting. It is a war against uninterrupted sitting. Let's go somewhere even more unexpected. Let's talk about astronauts. When humans travel to space, gravity disappears, and so does the constant demand placed on the circulatory system to fight against it. Almost immediately, astronauts experience fluid shifts. Blood and fluid move upward, toward the head and chest, instead of pooling downward as they do on Earth. This is part of why astronauts often develop puffier faces and thinner legs during time in orbit. Their bodies are responding to the sudden absence of the very force that normally shapes blood distribution. Over time, without gravity's resistance, blood vessels and even the heart itself can begin to change shape, adapting to an environment where circulation faces far less daily challenge. Why does this matter for someone simply sitting in a chair on Earth? Because it reveals something essential. Your circulatory system is not static. It is constantly adapting to whatever forces it experiences, whether that force is full gravity during standing and walking, or reduced demand during sitting, or near weightlessness in space. Sitting for 1 hour is nothing like space travel. But it exists on the same spectrum, a spectrum where less resistance, less movement, less demand always produces some form of adaptation. Your blood vessels are always listening, always adjusting, always responding to the story your movement tells them. Now let's bring this back down to something intensely personal. Your own hour right now. Picture the blood currently traveling through your body as a vast, invisible workforce. Red blood cells carrying oxygen to every tissue that needs it. White blood cells patrolling for threats. Platelets standing ready for injury. Plasma carrying nutrients, hormones, waste products, all moving in careful balance. For this workforce to function at its best, it depends on rhythm. Movement, then rest. Flow, then pause, just like everything else in a well-functioning system. An hour of sitting is not an emergency for this workforce. But it is a shift in instructions. A quiet message that says less urgency, less flow, less demand. Multiply that single hour across an 8-hour workday. Multiply that workday across 5 days a week. Multiply those weeks across years, even decades. This is not about 1 hour ruining your health. It is about understanding what 1 hour represents when it becomes the default rhythm of an entire life. And this is precisely why the science here is, in the end, hopeful rather than frightening. Because the same body that adapts to stillness adapts just as readily, often more quickly, to movement. Researchers studying vascular function have found that a single bout of movement, even something as simple as a brisk few minutes of walking, can measurably improve blood vessel dilation almost immediately afterward. This is remarkably fast, biologically speaking. Most health interventions take weeks to show measurable change. This one can show change within the same hour it is applied. Your blood vessels are, in a very real sense, forgiving. They do not hold grudges. They do not require perfection. They simply respond to whatever signal you send them next, which means the most powerful moment in this entire story is not the hour you have already spent sitting. It is the next few minutes, whatever you choose to do with them. Think about how different this feels from most health information. There is no diet to follow, no supplement to buy, no expensive equipment required, just movement distributed more evenly across your day than most modern schedules naturally allow. Some researchers have proposed simple, almost playful strategies, standing during phone calls, placing printers, water coolers, or trash bins slightly farther from your desk, so that reaching them requires a few extra steps, setting quiet reminders to stand every 30 minutes, even briefly. None of these strategies feel dramatic. That is exactly why they work. They do not require willpower reserved for major life changes. They fit quietly into the cracks of an ordinary day, and your bloodstream, it turns out, is remarkably attentive to those cracks. There is one more character in this story, one we have not properly introduced yet: your diaphragm. Most people think of breathing as something that only concerns the lungs. It does not. Every time you take a deep breath, your diaphragm drops downward, creating a pressure change inside your chest and abdomen. That pressure change acts like a gentle pump, helping draw blood upward through the large veins running through your torso, back toward your heart. When you sit for long periods, especially hunched slightly forward over a desk or a phone, breathing tends to become shallower. Shallow breathing means a smaller pressure change. A smaller pressure change means less assistance for blood trying to make its way back up from your lower body. It is a small factor, easy to overlook, but biology rarely relies on just one system to get a job done. Your blood's journey back to your heart depends on a partnership: leg muscles below, diaphragm above, valves throughout holding the gains along the way. Sitting quietly interrupts all three at once. Now picture something almost cinematic: a single red blood cell beginning its journey at your heart. It races out through the aorta, the largest artery in your body, carried by the force of a heartbeat. It travels downward into smaller and smaller vessels, eventually reaching the capillaries in your calf, vessels so narrow that red blood cells must bend and fold themselves just to pass through. There it releases oxygen to a hungry muscle cell. Now it must return, uphill, against gravity, with far less force behind it than the beat that sent it downward. If your leg muscles are moving, this return trip is fast, assisted, efficient. If your leg muscles are still, this same red blood cell may linger far longer than it should, caught in a slower current, waiting for a rhythm that is not coming. Multiply this single cell by the billions traveling through your body at this very moment, and you begin to understand the scale of what stillness actually means, internally. It is not one process slowing down. It is millions of tiny journeys, all quietly extended, all quietly delayed. Let's widen the lens for a moment and look at this from an entirely different angle: not human biology, animal biology. Giraffes offer one of nature's most extreme lessons in circulation. A giraffe's heart must generate enormous pressure to push blood all the way up a neck that can stretch several feet, against gravity, toward the brain. To prevent blood from pooling dangerously in their legs, giraffes have evolved remarkably tight skin and specialized valve systems in their veins, almost like built-in compression garments. Humans do not have neck-length circulatory challenges, but the underlying principle is identical. Wherever gravity fights against blood flow, the body needs assistance. Valves, pressure, movement. Giraffes evolved permanent anatomical solutions. Humans rely on something far more flexible and far more within our control. Behavior. We are not stuck with the circulatory challenges we are handed. We can respond to them moment to moment simply by choosing to move. This is worth sitting with, so to speak. Of all the species shaped by the pressures of gravity and circulation, humans are among the few who can consciously choose to counteract those pressures, anytime, almost anywhere. A giraffe cannot decide to shorten its neck for an afternoon. You can decide to stand up right now. That difference matters more than it might seem. Let's bring this story to something practical, something almost like a small case study. Picture two coworkers seated at neighboring desks, working through the exact same 8-hour day. The first checks emails, joins video calls, and works through spreadsheets without leaving their chair for hours at a stretch. The second does nearly identical work, but stands during phone calls, walks to a colleague's desk instead of sending a message, and takes the stairs to refill a water bottle every hour or so. By the end of the day, both have technically worked the same number of hours. But their blood has told two very different stories. The first person's blood vessels have spent long stretches without meaningful shear stress, meaning reduced nitric oxide signaling for extended periods. The second person's vessels have received repeated, small pulses of that same signaling throughout the day, keeping blood flow more consistently active. The first person's fat-clearing enzymes have likely spent long periods suppressed. The second person's enzymes have been intermittently reactivated, again and again, throughout the day. Neither of these people would feel dramatically different by 5 o'clock. But research following people over months and years, comparing these two patterns of daily movement, has consistently found meaningful differences in markers like blood sugar control, vascular flexibility, and long-term cardiovascular risk. This is the quiet power of pattern over willpower. Neither coworker needed extra time, neither needed a gym membership, neither needed to change their job. They simply needed to interrupt stillness again and again throughout an ordinary day. Now, let's return one final time to the very beginning of this story, to that first quiet hour, because that hour was never really about fear. It was about attention. Most people move through their days without ever noticing the extraordinary machinery working beneath their skin. The pump inside their calves, the paper-thin lining inside their arteries, the enzymes waiting patiently near their fat cells for a signal to switch on. That machinery does not ask for much. It does not demand hours of intense effort. It asks only to be remembered, occasionally, repeatedly, gently. And every time you stand, every time you walk, even briefly, you are answering that request. You are telling your blood vessels to relax and widen. You are telling your fat-clearing enzymes to wake back up. You are telling your blood sugar system that help has arrived. You are telling your brain that fresh, oxygen-rich blood is on its way. None of this requires perfection. None of this requires giving up the chair entirely. It simply requires remembering that stillness, however comfortable, is a signal, and your body is always listening for the next one. There is something else worth understanding, something that turns this entire story on its head. None of this means chairs are the enemy. Chairs did not create the problem. Uninterrupted stillness did. For thousands of years, people sat, rested, and paused throughout their days, often on the ground, often in positions that kept hips and legs gently active even during rest. The issue is not the act of sitting itself. The issue is duration without interruption. Hours stacked upon hours, with no signal sent to the muscles, no shear stress sent to the vessels, no contraction sent to wake the enzymes. This distinction matters because it changes the goal. The goal is not to eliminate sitting from modern life. For most people, that would be unrealistic and unnecessary. The goal is to break the silence periodically, to insert small bursts of motion into long stretches of stillness, the way punctuation breaks up a sentence, giving it rhythm, giving it breath. Think of your circulatory system as a story that needs pauses to make sense. Without pauses, even the most important words blur together, losing their meaning. Movement is the pause your blood has been waiting for. There is a particular kind of relief in understanding this, because it means the solution was never about restructuring your entire life. It was already sitting quietly inside the next few minutes. A short walk to another room, a few slow squats beside your desk. Rolling your ankles while reading this sentence, standing while you finish listening to this very story. Each of these tiny actions sends the same message traveling through your bloodstream, waking the same dormant systems, restoring the same vanishing flow. Your body does not require grand gestures. It simply requires that stillness never becomes permanent. Somewhere, right now, in a hospital, in an office, in a classroom, someone is standing up after a long stretch of sitting, without even realizing the quiet cascade they are triggering inside themselves. Blood beginning to move faster through vessels that had grown sluggish. Nitric oxide beginning to flow again, coaxing arteries to soften and widen. A dormant enzyme, waiting patiently near a blood vessel wall, switching back on, ready to clear fat from the bloodstream once more. Blood sugar regulation quietly improving, muscle by muscle, contraction by contraction. It is one of the most ordinary actions a human body can perform, and it is also, in its own quiet way, one of the most important. Except now, you know what is happening beneath the surface. You know that your leg muscles are your second heart, and that heart has gone quiet. You know that nitric oxide, one of the most important discoveries in cardiovascular science, depends on that quiet heart waking up. You know that fat-clearing enzymes are shutting down, not because anything is wrong with you, but because nothing is happening to tell them otherwise. You know that your blood sugar regulation is leaning on insulin a little harder than it needs to. You know that your brain, the most demanding organ in your body, may be quietly running on slightly less fuel than it deserves. None of this is a diagnosis. None of this is an emergency. It is simply what happens when a body built for motion spends an hour in stillness. And it is remarkable, in a strange way, that so much can shift in something as ordinary as 60 quiet minutes. Your blood has a memory of motion, going back further than you can imagine, further than written history, further than agriculture, further than fire. And every single day, in tiny, invisible ways, that memory is either honored or ignored. Not through extreme effort, not through hours of exercise, through interruption. Through standing, through one flight of stairs, through one short walk around the room. So here you are, exactly 1 hour later than when this story began. Somewhere between the first sentence and this one, something changed inside you. Blood slowed, vessels stiffened just slightly, enzymes quieted, sugar regulation shifted. Circulation adjusted to stillness, the way it has adjusted to stillness for as long as human bodies have existed. But so did the possibility of reversal. Because somewhere in the next few minutes, whenever you choose to stand, whenever you choose to walk, even briefly, all of it can begin turning back. Your blood is not waiting for permission. It is waiting for movement. And the moment you give it that movement, it responds almost instantly the way it always has, the way it always will. Quietly, faithfully, ready to move the second you are.